Session 3 of Albert Flynn de Silver's Writing as a Path to Awakening Writer's Workshop focuses on emergence. And here are a few great tips. Practice and process leads to emergence. Practice by reading and writing. Process evolves over time by practicing. Figure out what makes you comfortable and effective and remove blocks or hindrances. Practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes process. Avoid trying to be perfect. Process leads to proficiency. You'll get better and faster and create more content the more you write. You cannot think your way through it. You must write your way through it. Imagining yourself writing is not writing. Tune into your senses to figure out how you describe the world in your own voice.
Yeah, very different. Now we want to emerge healthy and dynamically in our writing. And the way we really emerge is through practice, right? And that's kind of the theme of the chapter is emergence, but practice and process are the driving forces behind emergence. And practice, I won't get too into practice because it's like, we all know what it means to be practiced. It's pretty cut and dry. I'll mention a few things about that and how this leads into process. But really, before we get started, I kind of just wanted to kind of check in and see how everyone's doing and how things went with your reading and this last month. And I think we had a couple of different assignments and prompts. And I think that the theme of reading is so important, and it's really a key component of nurturing practice and getting us into process. And how do we get to that next level of our process without reading? And I'm working with that a lot right now. I'm in the very final draft stage of my latest novel, and there are just certain structural, technical things of transitioning from sections and in chapters, how do we do that gracefully, right? How does everyone else do it? So I'm going back and reading some of my favorite novels and looking at those transitions. Okay, how do I make this time frame really read beautifully, read well, read fluidly, so that the readers feel like they're just going along on this journey from point A to point B, and then they get to the end, they're like, whoa, I learned all this cool stuff. I saw all these great characters evolve. I feel like I'm evolving myself. All that kind of stuff, which is really what a great story is about. So that's why I like to say that the reading is writing, writing is reading. And again, if it's for 5 minutes, 5 minutes. If it's for an hour, it's for an hour. Make that parameter as you can fit it into your life realistically right now. But you have to come to it regularly. It has to become embedded as a habit, as part of your daily routine. If you want to get something completed, if you want to get a book project completed in a certain time frame. And I've known people who've been like, oh yeah, I've been working on my memoir for 20 years. I'm like, seriously? Wow. Okay. But, when people say that, they've been writing a sentence every few months. It's how I imagine it. Consistency is it's a powerful thing. Completion, when we experience that sense of completion, even if it's just a hit of free writing for 5 minutes and we fill up, 3 or 4 pages, it's like, wow, I accomplished something. And you do this 5 times a week and you've got 20 or 30 pages.
Albert, can I ask you?
Please.
So I do a lot on the computer.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the same?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah, totally. I just like to write by hand, but this is where process comes in, where practice turns into process. You figure out, and I think this evolves organically, you just figure out what works for you. I love the movement and writing from this embodied experience into a notebook. It's just how I did it from day one, back in the when I first started keeping a journal in the 80s, I just kept these notebooks. We didn't have computers back then. And then as I became more of an established writer, it became my habit to start in a notebook freehand, and then my first draft was always going to the computer and typing it in. You know, something that I thought was good enough to type up, even if it was still rough and scrappy. But there were some phrases, there were some words in there that I thought, this is pretty interesting. I think we'll just start typing this and see where it goes. And that would be, you know, the next step in the process. And then I would work from there and go into the next phase, also in the computer, being typed up. So yeah, however it works for you. But
I was
just
actually thinking that I like the fluidity of writing as well, but I feel like I'm having difficulty getting structure, and that somehow it might work better, like when I'm focusing on the project, to actually do it in the computer, because sometimes when I write, it's like I can't even figure out what I wrote. From I can't read my own writing, and therefore it's like if it was in the computer, I could go back to it before. So,
yeah.
But that's just.
Sure, yeah, I mean, you have to kind of figure out what works for you, and if it's a stumbling block or a hindrance, then not recommended. But for me, it's just always been this leverage point, because I'm kind of editing as I go from the handwritten page into the computer. Inevitably, I'm just adding in words, I'm deleting stuff, I'm like, you know, and it's been maybe a day, or it's been an hour, it's been a day, it's been a week, as I'm typing it in, so I have I'm coming to it fresh, and I'm adding to it, and I'm changing it and tweaking it. So that's becomes part of the editing process. And I have terrible handwriting, but I can read it, like I understand it. Usually, I can figure it out. So, calendaring it, consistency, little wins keeps us going. Completion. There's something just psychologically about completion that's really, really powerful, and that gets us into the discipline. And so my favorite quote in this entire book is that practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes process. You know, I think perfection, do we have any perfectionists in the room? Yeah? Okay, so this can be a real hindrance, right? Because we want to get it right. We know that we're intelligent, bright people. We've been working at this a long time. We should be able to get it right the first time, you know. Or we can just sit and hammer on it forever until it's really shining like this perfect thing that I know is absolutely perfect. Well, in reality, there is no such thing as perfection, right? I mean, we have a conception of it, an idea of it, but what is perfection really? And I think it can be a hindrance if it keeps us from completion. And not that I'm suggesting that one shouldn't edit and rework and be really discerning about what you're writing, but that the perfection can keep us off the page. It can keep us from returning. And I think it is good to strive for a high level. You know, set the bar high for yourself in terms of the power of your language and how you want it to communicate in the world. But don't let this idea of perfection keep you from completing. I guess that's the main point. So practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes process. And if you stick with the process, it makes proficiency, right? Because that's how we get better. We just keep doing it. And we think that oftentimes, or at least I used to think a lot, that I could sort of think my way through it. But in truth, what really changed things for me was writing my way through it. Like I can't read about how to write a memoir. I mean, I can, partially, that's nice and helpful, but what I really learn, the way I really learn how to write a memoir is by writing a memoir. By writing, like Francis was saying, writing those memories down. Just being in the joy of writing those memories down. Things started to just stream into my mind. And I don't know where it came from. It came from my body, it came from my heart, it came from these trapped places. But it was through that action of writing, whether it's this action or that action. So try to get beyond that thinking about it and obsessing on it and just write. Just get in there and write. And the proficiency comes with that practice. Just doing it over and over and over and over and over again. And of course, getting help along the way, having our circles of writers, doing our reading. And that's the way we learn what's possible in a sentence, what's possible in a phrase, what's possible in a genre. And and instead of letting it hinder us and being like, oh my God, they're so amazing. Like sometimes I have that feeling with, whether it's Annie Proulx or Hart Crane as a poet or whoever it is that really we're just like, they're so amazing, I could never be like that. Sometimes we can think that it's a little bit of a hindrance because we're trying to like write like them, but we can't write like them. We can only write like us. Which isn't to say that we can't read them carefully and be like, wow, look at her verbal acrobatics with the sentence. Look how detailed she was. But those details are just from her sensory experience. What are the details in your sensory experience, right? And that's just refinement, that's just fine-tuning and close reading and practicing. And really kind of like doing your drills on the page, in your notebook. Writing favorite quotes down, rewriting, like when I was talking about last month about reading, actually copying out favorite sections from books that you're reading that you really just love. And I did this just the other day. I was reading it out, and there's this one thing, this one section, this character was talking about how people love to talk about their ailments or their depression, and they just go on and on about talking about their depression. It was just this like really biting, cutting piece of dialogue, but it was weirdly insightful, and it was so specific, and it so set the tone between these characters that I just copied the whole thing down in my notebook. I just wrote that whole thing down, and it was just like, I was just so curious about her rhythm and how she got that phrasing down and that insight down. And so to do that, that's kind of like your drills, that's your practice. And that certainly counts as your word count for the day or for the week or whatever it is. I include all kinds of chaotic notes. So if I have 15 minutes to free write, it might be that I'm just listing my favorite books, or I'm listing a series of memories I had if I'm working on a memoir, or I'm taking notes on structure from a book I'm reading about how to structure a memoir or how to structure your novel. So all of that counts. All of that's practice. All that's leading you into process. Big hindrance when I first started writing, in that I really, really wanted to be super original. I wanted just to be the most original, interesting poet on the planet. And it led me down this totally gnarly, dark road of obscurantia, for lack of a better term, and just like losing, I think, a level of emotionality. That's what was missing. I was more interested in being kind of different and original than I was of actually communicating and connecting. Mm-hmm. And so that was a big learning point. Like, okay, what else is out there? I used to sort of poo-poo Mary Oliver and all those accessible poets, because they were just too accessible. Like, you have to be kind of obscure, and you have to be a little bit hidden. And now I love Mary Oliver. But I also think that we have to kind of go down those roads, and follow them out to their dead ends, and turn around and go back, and allow that journey to inform our process along the way. And I think I learned a lot of really interesting things about musicality, for one thing, and rhythm in writing. A lot of this is in practice and processes is just the willingness to show up, really, to get your butt in the chair, be willing to revisit the writing, and to revision the writing. Revision, it's re-seeing it in different moods, and our moods are always changing. And so one moment we're frustrated, the next moment we're inspired. And to show up, to be awake to all those vagaries of feeling and emotion. And sometimes we can work that frustration into the story or into the memoir. You know, it can trigger the memory of the time that mom was so frustrated she grabbed my wrist so hard that she tore the skin. You know, it's like, whoa, where did that come from? So allow that stuff. Don't push it away, because I think it's all part of the process, even though it doesn't feel good. It's kind of essential to being a writer. What do we want? Do we want to just finish a draft for us to get through that story? Do we want to publish the next great American novel? What's your true, honest aspiration? And what's your time frame? You know, what are you willing to do to get there? And it helps to set these little goals and timelines so that you do complete, you know, because completion is so powerful. And I think I might have talked last time a little bit about just word count goals and just setting minimum word count goals for yourself. You know, if you do want to, if you're really aspiring to complete a book or to get a book project done, just to even get through that first draft. And it can be, you know, be realistic with yourself, but push yourself a little bit, right? So if it's a total breeze for you to knock out 200 words in a writing sitting period, you know, then, you know, push yourself for like, I mean, that's a really low amount. You can do that in like 4 minutes. So 500, 1,000, you know, 1,500, 2,000. What can you realistically do? And do that 4 times a week, 5 times a week. Process really, it evolves organically, right, over time. We have to kind of figure out ways that work for us. You know, and one thing that's worked really well for me is just at the beginning, particularly with like a prose, and it's different for different genres, right? But for a prose project, accumulating the material without judgment, like you were saying, of just getting that material down to start with and accumulating it, and not worrying about whether it's good or whether it's, you know, in the perfect format or the perfect order or even spelled correctly, et cetera, et cetera. And we talked, I think we mentioned NaNoWriMo last week, or last month. No? NaNoWriMo?
I don't
No,
think
National
anybody
Novel
saw
Writing Month?
I think you mentioned that at one point.
Oh, maybe.
I thought I mentioned it at one point. But anyways, it's National Novel Writing Month, so
As we're leaving.
every November, it's this thing, you can look it up online, Nano, N-A-N-O,
Right.
W-R-I-M-O, is, it's a whole thing, so National Novel Writing Month, and in that month, you go online, you register, and assuming you want to write a novel. It can also work for memoirs or other kinds of prose, actually. That's a great way of generating material for any sort of story. And you go on there and you register and you commit to writing 50,000 words in the month of November, which sounds like a lot, right? And it breaks down to, I think, like 1,887 words or something. I forget exactly what that number is. You can divide 50,000 by 30. It's somewhere around 1,800 words. And that, you do that every day, that's a lot of material to work with. And an average, and they do 50,000, it's not arbitrary, because 50,000 is about a 200-page book.
Is it only in November, or you can do it any time?
I mean, you can. I've done it at any time, but that's when it's all kind of registering. You get all the support online, and you can connect with little groups and cheer each other on and support each other. And you get like little badges, you know, as you make it to day 1 and day 10. It's great because it's just like, it's hard. It's hard to stay that consistent and to generate that much material, right? But it's an amazing way. And I used it for the first draft of my memoir, when I was writing my memoir. And I, you know, I didn't quite, I don't know if that first month I might have gotten up to like 40,000 words. But I was just like, I was feeling heroic. I was like, I could not imagine ever writing that much material. Because I had been writing poetry for so many years. and a totally different process, right? For me, poetry is about, it's about spaciousness. It's about, images floating through the mind and jotting them down. And sometimes a poem will come out whole, but it's very rare. It's mostly just like erratic and sporadic, jotting of notes and following threads of images, and not like hammering out a free write for 15 or 20 minutes and knocking out 1,000 words right off the bat, which you can do. And when you do free write, you can knock out your 1,800 words in about, I would say 15, depending on how fast you write or how fast you type, in about 15 or 20 minutes.
Oh.
Yeah. It might, and again, that's like depends on how fast you type. I tend to be a very slow typer. I'm a faster handwriter. But when I set my clock and I do it and I really stick to it, you generate a lot of material in a short period of time. And again, you're not worried about, you're letting go of that perfectionism, as hard as it may be, just like really devoting to it and sitting with the muck of it. And all the judgment and all the thoughts, just being like, this doesn't have to be any good right now. Just generating material. And I promise you, as you go through and you stay consistent with the process, there, within those 1,800 words, within that 30-day period, there's going to be a lot of really interesting stuff. It's just part of being human. This is part of my whole thing about us being creative geniuses. It's true. There's so much interesting stuff influencing us every day. We're very smart people. And you're going to write some really interesting stuff that you're going to want to keep. So I hired, I've actually hired 2 editors, private editors, to help me through this process structure before my before my agent sees it. And then he's going to look at it and he's going to be like, oh, no, you got to change this. And what if you did that? And this isn't working. Or maybe he won't. Maybe he'll be like, whoa, this is great. Let's, go out with it.
Have you found that if you, like at some point in the process, take something out and then does it ever go back in? Or is it?
Sometimes it does, yeah. And here's what I do as part of my process. That's I found really helpful. I keep a compost folder for every project. And every time I delete something, it goes into the compost folder. I have some really amazing chunks of dialogue, some prose scenes that I absolutely love. They just aren't working, or they're just not in the right place. They're not working now. So I put them in the compost folder, and every once in a while I'll go into my compost folder and I'll reread it. And I won't totally abandon it. So don't delete stuff, just keep a compost folder. You may not look at it, you may look at it. I think it's good to look at it and be like, because sometimes we junk stuff and then we look at it 2 weeks later and we're like, wow, that was actually pretty good. I want that back. Or we have, our editor said, that really doesn't work quite so well, but you're like, no, I really think this works and I really want this to stay in. I had a couple of, getting back to nonfiction, I had a couple of things that my editor was like, no, it's a little too much, it's a little too poetic-y. I was like, well, I'm a poet, and I want to keep this in. I felt pretty strongly about a couple of those hyper-specific, poetic-y kind of things, and I wanted them in there. And he was like, okay, you can keep it. I'm here to give you feedback. Most of his edits, I was like, I was willing to cut and try. I tend to overwrite. That's my style and my process is to overwrite. Because then I have more stuff to work with and I can pull stuff out. And this is another place where mindfulness and when the meditation practice becomes really powerful, is that we become better observers we become more sensitive and more tuned in to our sensory experience. And we innately just give language to that, especially as writers, as creative people. It's natural to do that. And so to become our part of our practice and our process as writers, to really tune into our sensory experience, to slow down and to get quiet, to be like, what am I smelling right now? What is the quality of that smell? What is it reminding me of? What is this texture really about? And what is deep listening? What are the sounds? And how are they coming in to my ears? So allow that to be part of your practice of tuning into that, because that's where your unique voice is really going to come to the surface. And that's what's going to make that's what voice is, really. It's your unique sensory impressions, as only you can experience them, and only you can communicate them through words. Through the words that you know, through the words that you've read. And at some point this just becomes intuitive. But that intuition arises out of practice, out of meeting the page, out of showing up every day. So we gather language, we gather sensory impressions.